Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Thank you for joining today's live webinar, Hub Sites Don't Have to Be Spooky. My name is Danny Smith, and I am the Manager of Events and Marketing at Microexcel, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. During today's presentation, we will dive into Hub Sites to show you what are Hub Sites and why do we need them, how to define hubs, navigation, and how content aggregation works, how to begin designing your Hub Site, what is the roadmap of these Hub Sites, and more. By the end of the session, you will have a better understanding of what they are, how to administer them, and if they are the right solution for your company. Our presenter for today is Mr. Justin Sypek, a technology professional with over 16 years of experience architecting, designing, and developing Windows, web, and SharePoint applications using the Microsoft technology stack. Mr. Sypek is a Microsoft P seller on the productivity stack for the New York Metro. As the head of the Microsoft practice for Microexcel, Mr. Sypek oversees the global development and delivery teams for the entire Microsoft technology stack. Just a few laundry items to share with you before we get started. This webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be sent out in a few days. Also, we will have a Q&A portion at the end, so please type any questions you may have in the questions box, and we will get to those in the order they are received. If you have questions after the webinar, please feel free to contact us at info@microexcel.com. At the conclusion of today's webinar, there will be a brief survey. Please take a few moments and share your thoughts with us. Without further ado, I'd like to present our speaker for today's event, Mr. Justin Sypek.
Thanks, Danny, and welcome everybody to today's webinar. I hope you are looking forward to understanding the spooky truth about Microsoft SharePoint Hub Sites. So real quick, we'll relay the agenda for today. So we're going to do some background on what Hub Sites are, how they came into play, and how we can set our tenant up to be, have those Hub Sites available to us. We'll walk through some capabilities on the hubs and how we do that content aggregation, how we set up navigation, how we have consistent visualization for those hub sites. We'll do a quick review on some of the future roadmap features that are going to be rolling out over the course of the next couple of months, and certainly we'll have time for that Q&A. So real quick, I just wanted to give a brief about Microexcel and why we certainly are the partner of choice to help you with your SharePoint initiatives, as well as configuring some of these rich responsive portals leveraging the hub sites. So we are a gold cloud productivity partner. We also have gold competencies in cloud platform collaboration, content, application development, and data analytics. We are systems integrators at heart, trying to help organizations like yourselves, adopt these Microsoft technologies and build true value solutions for your business. So what we've done is we've sort of identified 4 pillars of our digital transformation journey, and that's where we've tried to help our customers, through this journey. We've identified those 4 pillars being planning, adopting, managing, and embracing. Right? Obviously, when we're looking at any new technology or we're looking to migrate from on-premise to the cloud, right? There's certainly a process that we want to follow to help mitigate some of the change management and mitigate some of the risks with some of those technology upgrades, right? So a lot of what we do for our customers is help do some initial road mapping and visioning planning sessions to help them understand what the capabilities are that exist, in an Office 365, a Dynamics 365, or an Azure, and how they fit in with these technologies that they may already have on-premise. And then obviously we want to, roll out some of those initial workloads, being SharePoint, Exchange, OneDrive, Skype for Business, migrate from on-prem content or on-premise server hardware to software as a service type activities like Office 365, right? Truly building some of those rich, intuitive portals. That's really what we're talking about today, and that's where these hub sites fit into this picture, along with process automation and user training, obviously helping customers manage, the rollout of these new workloads, manage the change required and provide some knowledge transfer to help to help your employees and help your support team understand, the new capabilities and how we want to, administer things like hub sites and modern SharePoint experiences as such. So after that, obviously, it's really about embracing the technologies that we've got today. Building custom applications, really rich business intelligence, doing integration between ERPs and CRMs and things like SharePoint and leveraging things like Power Apps and Flow and even adopting of Teams and maybe building some chatbots to help with some of that adoption as well. So today we're really going to focus on that adoption stack and specifically talking about those rich intuitive portals. So what I've got here is I sort of have identified some of the core features and functionality of let's say a corporate portal, corporate intranet, enterprise portal. And obviously you're going to talk about things like visualization, security, web content management, document management, collaboration, process automation, and then you've got a stack of features that sit on top of it, sometimes overlapping and sometimes not. But things to consider, especially in today's day and age, are mobility and branding, right? Are we going to have responsive portals, or are we going to end up maybe building native iOS applications, or what's the workforce that's accessing some of these corporate intranets? Are they all information workers that are sitting at a desktop, or are they remote employees? If they're remote employees, how are we going to manage authentication and authorization? Are we going to provide single sign-on? Are we providing multi-factor authentication? Do we need external users to have access to some of this content, right? So all of that really goes into planning for security. And then obviously from a web content management perspective and document management perspective, we're going to build these, nice corporate landing pages, and we're going to have departmental site templates, and we're going to have business unit pages, and we're going to have team sites, and we're going to potentially manage projects and have project sites that have task roll-ups, and we're going to obviously have our document content that sits in SharePoint and put rich information architecture and metadata and your corporate taxonomy related to all of that. How do we have enterprise social? How do we do gamification? How do we do internal chats? What processes and forms and workflows do we want to build? So leveraging and putting enterprise search on top of all of that. In the past, I would have said that this was SharePoint back on-prem. SharePoint 2007 even had a lot of these features and functionality, and that's really what we built our robust intranets on. But today, when we talk about these enterprise portals and thinking about Office 365, it's not just SharePoint that provide a lot of this features and functionality, right? So it's thinking about how do we leverage things like Office 365 groups, and what's the security and compliance and DLP policies and rights management policies? How does Delve and Power BI fit into play? And what are we going to do with OneDrive for Business versus SharePoint in terms of sharing of content and publishing content and storing those documents, etc. And then even from a chat perspective or a social perspective, what's the difference between Yammer and Teams, and what's my inner loop versus my outer loop collaboration? So certainly a lot goes into play when sort of envisioning what these enterprise portals are, and today we're going to just touch on a little bit of it in terms of some of that web content management and maybe some of that document management with our hub sites. So let's jump into a quick background in terms of hubs and why maybe we want them, right? So again, sort of going back to our initial, hey, SharePoint's been around for a long time, and a lot of us probably initially had intranets that were based on SharePoint 2007, and maybe this is a sample of what some of that structure would look like, right? We had web applications, and those web applications had site collections, and those site collections have subsites, and those subsites have a ton of different lists and libraries and folders, etc. So you end up getting, a lot of content sprawl. You end up building, let's say, your HR department portals and your sales team sites, and maybe you have your location sites, and maybe you've got some applications like travel programs and expense trackers, and you've got policies, and policies aren't just HR policies, but they're HR policies and finance policies and IT policies, right? So there's a bunch of information, and you know what? The way that we probably structured our sites and structured our IA back, a good 10 plus years ago, isn't how we potentially want to think about doing that today. So as you sort of transition over, SharePoint 2007 to 2010, you probably did a content database attach, and in 2010 you probably said, well, you know what, we need to redesign our information architecture a little. So you probably ended up, creating some new site collections, and maybe you use tools like MetaLogix or AvePoint to copy content from one site collection to another. Maybe you have multiple web applications for your intranet and your extranets. So what ends up happening as you sort of transition and as your intranet portal morphs, obviously a lot of the subsites that you have and a lot of the site collections, they sort of get realigned. Your IA ends up being rehashed, and then you go from something like SharePoint 2010 to SharePoint 2013, and SharePoint 2013 introduces enterprise search. So maybe you really have a focus on information architecture more than the structure itself. Having nested sites become something that's less relevant, because we're going to be able to aggregate content automatically by having content search web parts and display templates and stuff. So, as your organization evolves and as adoption of these platforms and portals evolve, obviously so does the structure within those sites themselves. So that's sort of why we're being introduced with these hub sites, because obviously you want the ability of really defining administrative structure. So, we're going to have department sites, we're going to have business unit sites, we're going to have functional area sites, we're going to have team sites. But within each of those, different sites, obviously I can have a collection of other sites that are sort of associated and related to them. And why not give owners of those sites the ability of saying, hey, you know what, we want to be part of these specific areas, which would be those hubs. So before we get into too much more, and while these skeletons end up taking some selfies of themselves, why don't we pop up a quick survey? Survey is going to basically ask you guys, what are you doing for your corporate intranets today? Do you have them built on SharePoint? Are they built on SharePoint on-premise? Does SharePoint creep you guys out, and you know what, you're not necessarily looking to leverage it to build your intranets, and maybe it's just your document store? Or do you guys love SharePoint Online and you've already rolled out hub sites, and you guys probably should be the ones doing these webinars for me? Or are you on SharePoint Online and maybe just haven't had the ability of introducing hubs into your portal yet?
Okay, Justin, we'll give everyone a couple more seconds to get their answers in.
Sure.
Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and close the poll now. And it looks like 36% have answered with we do, but it's SharePoint on-prem. 5% said SharePoint creeps me out, our intranet isn't SharePoint. 14% love SharePoint Online and already use hub sites. And 45% responded with we love SharePoint Online but haven't rolled out hubs.
Great, appreciate that. Thanks everybody for providing that information. So let's take a quick look and see what hub sites are really doing for us, right? Why would we even want to yet again restructure our corporate portals and intranets and introduce another new feature? Well, look, hub sites really give us, as I mentioned, a way to better organize that content. It allows us to apply some governance as well, and you'll see what I mean by that in terms of maybe some visualizations, as well as being able to sort of define templates and have that traverse through your content. And it allows you to collaborate, connect, allows you to aggregate content within specific groups. So basically what we end up having with a hub is you've got this initial site. That is our hub site, right? That hub site is very typically going to be the initial landing page. It's going to be your communication site, let's say, and that's where we're going to have the majority of our information. That's where we're going to drive people to, right? So this example, it's an HR site. So what you end up having is you end up having that hub site, and then what you can do is you can have those Office 365 group sites, those modern team sites. You can have more communication sites, and all of those can be associated with that hub. So any of that information that we show on the hub site can actually be automatically aggregated from a combination of those team sites and communication sites, which are already associated to that hub. So the structure ends up looking a little like this, where we've got that, highest level hub site. That hub site itself is going to be created by one of your SharePoint tenant administrators, that are probably going to assign that as I mentioned, as a communication site. Once they configure that site to be a hub, then what you do is any of those other team sites or communication sites, right? So your users go to their little app launcher waffle and they click on SharePoint. It gives them this great page that shows them, their pinned sites and recommended sites and sites that they've recently visited. And it also gives them the ability of creating sites, so long as you have that enabled within your tenant, right? So they can create one of these modern team sites or one of these modern communication sites, and once it spins that site up for them, then they'll have the ability of going and connecting it to that hub site. So then what you end up having is you have those four things on the bottom, the navigation, that ends up being consistent across the hub site as well as the team and the communication sites. And that's done by actually introducing a new hub site navigation, right? So you have a hub site navigation, which is persistent across all of those sites. But then also, obviously, you would have the site navigation itself, which would be unique between each one of those hub team communication sites, right? It would apply a consistent theming, a consistent logo, right? So your hub navigation, your hub site would actually have a logo associated to it. You could apply a theme. That theme ends up, trickling down again to any of the sites that are associated to it. Not only that, but a search scope is created, right? So now from anywhere within that hub or any of those sites that I'm in, I have the ability of not only searching content that exists on the current site that I'm in, but actually within that entire hub, really. And what that applies to is some of those web parts as well, right? Some of the news and activity, some of those aggregating web parts that we have in that modern team, modern communication experience. All of that now has the ability of leveraging that search scope as well to automatically have content that is aggregated across those different sites. Right. So again, real quick, right, why do we want to have hub sites? Right, gives us that cross-site navigation. Gives us that content roll-up through those modern web parts. It allows us to apply some governance related to consistent look and feel, and it really gives us some enhanced search capabilities. So just some things to keep in mind when we're creating these hub sites. That initial hub site, that top-level site, can be one of the modern communication, or it can be one of those modern team site templates. Now you can use classic sites, but there's things to remember that classic team sites don't allow us to have a lot of the web parts that exist in those modern pages, right? So the hero web part, the new news web part, the documents web part, the site aggregating web part, right? All of those things that actually can leverage the hubs, and we'll get to that a little later, aren't available within those classic sites. And similarly, yes, we would actually see hub site navigation across classic teams and the modern experiences, but the consistent look and feel is going to be different, right? The way that we branded those classic team sites back in the day with master pages and page layouts and all of that stuff, that doesn't translate into this modern experience. So you would basically be providing your intranet with two different look and feel flavors. So for the most part, we recommend that you try to leave everything in those modern team, modern communication sites, and if you do have some classic team sites, maybe build a new site out and think about doing a migration of that content, of the pages, et cetera, leveraging a tool like MetaLogix or ShareGate or AvePoint or something like that. So another thing, there is no ability of having nested hub sites, let's say, right? So if I've got a site that I've defined as my HR hub, I can't have that HR hub and all of the associated sites below it be part of a intranet hub, right? That sort of hierarchy doesn't exist within hub sites themselves. Now, what obviously you could do is you could create an IT hub, you could create an HR hub, you can create a product hub, and all of those can then be added to a global navigation, maybe, which would be your intranet. And that intranet would then have the ability of linking back to those various hubs, et cetera, but in reality, the hub association can't be linked. Once you've got one site part of a hub, you can't obviously have that be part of another hub, right? So you always have the ability of changing the hub that you're associated to, but not necessarily being able to have, obviously, one site be part of multiple hubs. Right now, there's a limitation where each tenant can only have 100 hubs in that organization. I mean, when you think about your organization, there's some limitations that you can only have the same geographical location be associated to hubs, right? So, when you create some of these sites, if your SharePoint environment is multi-geo, then if I had a site that was in the US and a site that was in India and stuff, I couldn't necessarily have those be part of the same hub as well. Users that get associated with hubs, the permissions are not something that are trickled down either, right? So each site itself will have its own set of permissions. Those permissions do not inherit from the parent, right? They don't inherit from the hub site like you would if you created, just a direct subsite. And then obviously from the hub navigation itself, it's something that's available in the root of the site, right at the top of the site. There's things that you can do to programmatically change that hub site navigation. You can use REST, you can use CSOM, you could build a client, a SharePoint framework header, and you could actually embed a navigation in that, right? So there's things that you can do to replace some of the limitations, I guess, that you would end up getting from some of those hub sites. Sorry, okay. So some of the ways to create those hub sites, certainly you have the PowerShell commands, right? So you can register your SharePoint hub sites. So what you do is you go to your SharePoint tenant, you can have your SharePoint admin create a new communication site, or you could basically just have a communication site that maybe exists already and you want to define that as a hub. So whatever the URL to that site is, you'd need to open up your SharePoint Online PowerShell, and you'd have to register that site as a hub site. Another thing that you can do once you've registered that hub site with the PowerShell is you have the ability of actually creating some boundaries around who are the people that can actually associate sites to hubs, right? So you can grant some hub site rights to some different principals, right? So maybe you have a group that says site owners, and that site owners group is the only ones that have the ability as to go in and take one of the sites that they actually own and associate to a hub. Right, so very similar to being able to register your SharePoint hub sites, you've got the ability of unregistering it, right? Unregister your SPO SharePoint hub sites, same PowerShell commands, and that would just take one of those sites that's already been defined as that top parent hub and removing that. Lastly, right, Microsoft has released some Office 365 CLI. That CLI allows us to manage hub sites as well, right? So here's just a little snippet that allows you to get some data related to the hub sites. Right? This is more geared towards our developers, I guess, more so than PowerShell would be, more for those SharePoint administrators, et cetera, et cetera. So now that we've gone and sort of discussed background on hub sites and how we can initiate some of those hub sites, let's do a quick walkthrough on what it looks like from an actual SharePoint environment perspective, right? So here what I've got is I've got my SharePoint Admin Center. So this is obviously the new Admin Center that's in preview mode right now, where it's showing me a list of all of my modern team sites, my Office 365 group sites, my communication sites, right? And you can see here in the middle, I've got this column called Hub Site Association. So the last site that I have, that Contoso Marketing Central, is obviously, that's my hub site, right? You can see it in the parentheses. And right now I've got a product marketing and a Contoso Insider. And both of those are communication sites, and they are associated to that Contoso Marketing Central hub site itself. So now what we can do is me as an end user, I can go again to my my SharePoint waffle from my app launcher. I can click Create Site, and it's going to give me the ability of creating, one of these communication sites, or it's going to give me the ability of creating one of those modern, team group sites. I'm going to create a new site called Happy Halloween. I'm going to let that provision. Once that provisions, I'm going to get a site that looks, very similar to the out-of-the-box web parts or the out-of-the-box communication sites that we have, right? You can see this here web part has a lot of the blue color embedded, right? That's sort of the Microsoft standard. So right now, my site has really has no theming or branding applied to it, right? Minus the Office suite bar that I've colored already, right? But that ends up being consistent across the entire tenant, right? If I opened up, Office web apps, I'm going to see that. If I go to OneDrive, I'm going to see that. So that really that orange bar with the black, app launcher is something that is tenant wide. It's not specific to this hub or this SharePoint site. So now what I have the ability of doing is I can click on this little wheel up at the top, and once I click on that wheel and I edit my site information, it's going to allow me to actually do some things. I can obviously update the logo of my sites, but more importantly, I can change the hub site association. So again, with the way that the tenant configuration is today, I've got the ability of having 100 of these hub site associations. So that drop down could get rather lengthy. Right now, there is no filtering or refining, or there's no way of permissioning which hub sites I could apply to, right? Only if I have the ability of actually associating sites. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, this out-of-the-box communication site. I'm going to associate it to my hub. And when I click save, what ends up happening is all of a sudden that custom theme that we've created, that branding, now gets applied to this site, right? Also up at the top, you can see that my hub site navigation has already shown. So I've got my Contoso Marketing Central. That's obviously my root site. I've got the Contoso Insider, the product marketing, right? Those are other sites again that were associated to this hub. If I click on this wheel here and I try to change the look and feel, right? So if I change the look of the site, it's going to tell me that I can't, because I am already inheriting the look of that Contoso Marketing Central hub site, right? So again, that allows us to apply some governance related to, the look and feels of the sites and the look and feels of the hubs, et cetera, et cetera. So what I also have the ability of doing is now I can see what some of that functionality is that we talked about, right? So what are some of those those modern web parts, and what is some of those content aggregations that we have? So right now what I've got is I've got a little news web part, right? Modern news web part that's going to come by default on your site when you provision it anyway. But what I have the ability of doing is taking a look at some of the sources for this news. Obviously, I could use this site, or I could select some sites. And if we select some sites, you can see that I actually have a drop down that says sites associated with this hub. So right now, it's going to show me the hub site itself, and it's going to show me the 3 sites that I've associated. So what I can do is I can say, you know what, I want this news to aggregate from any one to many of the sites associated in this hub. So now I'm automatically doing that content aggregation, right? These news articles are basically the pages that we create when we go and we do our web content management, and the modern experience has really given a much more rich capability to do that, where it's a bit more intuitive when you want to add a teaser text or a title, and you want to add a roll-up image that also acts as a tile background, and you want to be able to add some web parts, and all of that sort of is done within one page, and I don't have to go and save images to an assets library and then copy the link to that asset itself and then go to a page and paste that into an actual page property somewhere after I've created the page itself. So that experience has been far improved. So now what we have obviously is the ability of aggregating some of that information. So a lot like we had that that news roll up, what I've got is I've got this document roll up here, and some of the sources here obviously is I can show documents again from the site, or I could set a specific library, but relevant to today's conversation, I can choose documents that are associated to all of the sites in this hub, right? And obviously there's some nice filter criteria that you can do. You can filter it by some metadata. You can filter it by any of those properties that you would have on your documents themselves. So it gives you again a nice way of being able to aggregate content across multiple sites that are associated to that hub. And last, obviously, what we have is, there's a nice brand new site web part as well, which allows me to on the home page, maybe I've got my global navigation, but maybe there's some other sites that I want to be able to highlight that are part of the hub that maybe don't exist in that global navigation. So same as we had before, I have some options where I could select all the sites that are in the hub, or if I choose some specific sites, I go to that select sites. It's going to show me again all of the sites that are in that hub, and I can choose one to many of those as well. Right, so that's gonna be most of what we can do, at least from a content aggregation standpoint today. So we've talked about, a little bit on the look and feel. We've talked about, the content aggregation, and the next part really is tackling this navigation, right? So unfortunately, the hub site navigation is somewhat manual still today, right? It's not doing any automated aggregating of content. So if I want to go and I want to add my new Halloween site to this Contoso Marketing Central, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click edit from the hub site navigation, and I'm going to click the little plus, and I can name whatever URL I want, but I'm still copying and pasting that URL in. When I click OK, then it ends up displaying in that hub site navigation, right? So as I mentioned before, yes, I've got hub site navigation, I've got global navigation, which still exists within the site itself, right? So, that home documents, site contents, marketing vendors, right? Those things are unique to this Contoso Marketing Central, whereas under the Insider, the marketing, the Halloween sites, they're all going to have, some different global navigation. So the last thing that we really have, we basically used this functionality already when we were aggregating content through, the news and the documents and the sites, is I've got that search scope, right? So now if I actually go to search, and if I could do this through any of the sites that were associated to that hub, right, the same result set is going to come to me. So if I go to search and I type in H, it's going to show me, news, documents, content, as well as sites, again, that are all in either the site that I'm on, which is the hub site, or any associated sites within that hub as well, right? So this allows us, again, to sort of refine our search experience to that hub itself. So that's, for the most part, what we've got in terms of our SharePoint Online communication sites, hub sites, right? Stuff that exists today. So let's take a quick look at the roadmap, right? Because look, the reality is it's going to take some time to plan these hub sites, to sort of plan some of the information architecture and the structure, and what should be a hub and what should be an associated site, and what do I have today. So while you're going through that process, obviously one of the great things about Office 365 and SharePoint Online is that it's greenfield, right? There's rolling updates that are happening, consistently on a monthly basis. And Microsoft's done a good job of actually giving us information related to their roadmap across, not only SharePoint Online, but all of the workloads that exist within Office 365 themselves. Right, things like Power Apps and Flow and Power BI and Forms, right? There's roadmaps associated to all of those different product technologies. So from a SharePoint perspective, all I did is I just pulled out a couple of somewhat relevant updates that are happening to hub sites in the next either near future or over the course of the next couple of months, right? So today I showed you that I can only create, or I can only tag a site as a hub leveraging PowerShell, right? So one of the things that's obviously coming in the near term is in that administrator, the SharePoint admin preview that I showed you, there'll be a way of being able to actually take a site and make it a hub, as well as if I've got another, some other sites, I can take those sites and I can make them associated with that hub site as well. Another thing that's coming is, right, so if I had that, Product Marketing Central, that is my initial hub site. So I've gone in, maybe leveraging this new admin center, I've taken a site, I've made it a hub, and what I want to do is now I want to go to that hub and I want to start spawning off more sites that I know are going to be part of that hub. So instead of going to our app launcher and going to SharePoint and creating sites, or having an administrator just plow through a bunch of different sites in the SharePoint admin, and then later going back and associating them to the hub, right? If I go to that root hub site, we'll have the ability of actually creating sites from there, and that will automatically create that team site or communication site and associate it to the hub that it was created from. Again, the great things about this modern experience is the changes to these web parts that are coming all the time. And look, maybe there's web parts that existed in the classic experience and on-prem SharePoint, which maybe aren't there as part of Office 365 yet, or maybe we've got web parts that are part of this modern communication, modern team site, and they just haven't been enhanced with some of that hub navigation yet. And so one of those web parts is basically the event rollup, right? So there's a nice new modern event web part that you can put on your Office 365 group sites, team sites, and communication sites. So that will very, very soon have the ability of like the other ones, being able to select this site or select all hub sites, or from, I can select sites within that hub as well to aggregate events, calendar events, right? Another capability that's coming is mega menus, right? So this was something that was announced a couple of months ago. Those mega menus are coming to global navigation as well as hub site navigation, right? So if you have just a laundry list of links that you want to be able to have in your navigation, so people sort of have a one-stop shop to be able to see a lot of the content exists, right? We try to give everybody in our intranet access to 80% of the content that they want within 1 or 2 clicks, so that mega menu gives them that ability. That's something that'll be rolling out soon. And then something that's really been missing from a lot of this modern experience itself has been audience targeting, right? Being able to filter content based on a group or something that I'm associated to, or being able to hide links that exist in navigation based on a group that I'm in, right? That just doesn't exist. So something that should be rolling out over the next, half a year or so is being able to actually put audience targeting on hub site navigation. So just a couple of quick screenshots, right? So this would be what that modern admin panel looks like for SharePoint. I can select one of my sites, and you can see I can convert it to a hub site, or I could associate that to another hub site, right? So that's just how we'll, moving forward, be able to create and associate hubs. And then just a quick snapshot of what some of the mega menu possibilities might look like for our general global navigation as well as hub site navigation. So for the most part, that's what I've got to share in terms of hubs and where we are today and where we are potentially in the future. So if there's any questions, I'd love to hear them.
Thank you, Justin. So we have had a question come through during the presentation. That question is, I saw you say that the maximum number of hub sites per tenant is 100, but I read somewhere that it was only 50.
Right, so that's true. When these hub sites initially rolled out, there was a limitation of only being able to have 50 hubs within a site. One of these, one of the roadmap items that rolled out, a couple of months ago was increasing that from 50 to 100. So it is now 100.
Okay, thank you. The next question is it possible to use site scripting when associating sites to hubs?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So site scripting is probably a whole nother webinar topic that we can go through at some point in time. For those of you that don't know, site scripting basically gives us the ability of creating templates now, right? So, back in the day, we probably used to do a lot of create site as template, and even with some of our publishing sites, maybe we'd actually end up creating templates even though we shouldn't have, and that was great because it gave us the ability of creating some standard lists and libraries and documents, etc. When we created our sites. Today, that doesn't really exist in SharePoint Online or with some of these modern team and modern communication sites. So what's been introduced is this idea of site scripting, right? So when a site's created, we can create sort of a new script where I associate that to a provisioning action. And anytime I want to provision, a communication site, I could have a canned template. I could have, Microexcel landing page templates. And when I click on that, what ends up happening is it will go through the default provisioning action for that communication site, but then it can do things like automatically create lists and libraries, automatically create content types and columns, and being able to put default content in, and being able to apply default branding and apply an initial permission set, right? So it's really just a set of actions that happen post-provisioning, which will really give us that standardized template. So yes, one of the things that you can do when you associate hub sites is, you can attach that site scripting as well. So whenever a site is associated to a hub, you can go through the set of actions and really give yourself that governance that you would want to.
Okay, great. The next question is, any tips for managing navigation between hubs?
Yeah, so that's a great question. That's something that potentially this mega menu will allow us to do, right? Because a lot of the times what we've seen in the past is I've got an intranet, and that intranet has a global navigation, right? That global navigation has, some flyouts for departments, and I'd go over to the departments flyout and I'd see HR and IT and finance and operations, and then I'd have another flyout for locations, and I'd see US and China and India, and then I'd have another flyout for business unit or functional areas, right? So today, when you're thinking about these hubs, it's almost like, okay, so I'm going to have a hub for HR, and then I'm going to have a benefits site associated to it, and then I'm going to have, a policy site associated to it, and all of that's going to make my HR hub. And then I'm going to have a marketing hub, and that marketing hub is going to have creative services, and it's going to have, external marketing, and we're going to have corporate communications, and that's my marketing hub. And unfortunately, right, there's no way of being able to have a pretty structured global navigation, right? So what we do today is we actually do create those SharePoint framework headers, and that SharePoint framework header we sort of treat as our global navigation for the intranet itself. It is an aggregation of hub sites. Now, obviously, if we had 100 hub sites, that's not going to work. But typically, we don't see that. Right? We probably have organizations that have somewhere between 5 to 10 of those hubs, and that being able to create that SharePoint framework navigation really helps from that perspective.
Okay. Going off of the whole global mega nav, the next question is, when we create the global mega nav, how is that going to be done? Will it be done through the term store or something else?
Yeah, so that's those are some of the things that are probably not yet publicly announced. I would expect that there certainly will be term navigation, but I would expect that very much like the initial rollout of hub sites, that it's going to be something that is potentially manually managed as well.
Okay. The next question is, Hubs only applies to SharePoint Online, correct? It is not currently shipping with SharePoint 2019.
Yeah, that's correct. So even though SharePoint 2019 allows us to do a lot of this modern communications and the modern team sites, and at least we've bridged that gap specifically in hybrid scenarios, so I can have consistent look and feels and consistent experiences. Unfortunately, the initial rollout of SharePoint 2019, right, which just rolled out general availability, about 10 days ago, that does not have the ability of having hub sites.
Okay. Our next question is hub site a license specific? As in, is this available for E1, E3, E5 licenses?
Yeah, so it's just part of SharePoint, right? It's not a brand new SKU like Power Apps or Flow or Power BI or anything. So, anywhere from Business Essentials and Business Premium to those E1s, E3, E5s, right? This is an inherent functionality of SharePoint itself. It's not something that is an additional license.
Okay, the next question is, how many sites can be associated with a hub?
Yeah, so right now there's there's no limit to the number of sites that you can actually associate to the hub. The only limitation is the number of hub sites that you can have.
Okay, the next question is, let's see here. My SharePoint admin preview has a hub associations.
Okay, so again, I showed that that was something that was rolling out.
They added to that. Sorry, my SharePoint admin preview has a hub associations column, but not a convert option.
Right. So it's, again, if we look back at that roadmap, it's something that was supposed to roll out October this year, right? So I think that it's rolling out to certain tenants. It's not fully rolled out, right? It is sort of in the development and rollout phase. And one of the things about Office 365, right, is there's multiple ways of being part of like the insider program. So, you know, you can have your entire tenant be part of the early preview. You can have certain specific users be part of the early preview, or you can say, you know, this tenant itself is not participating in that insider early preview at all. So, and even through the, you know, my entire tenant versus the, you know, certain users can have access to early previews, right? Even that stuff doesn't get rolled out at the same time. So, you know, you could be one of the lucky people that are part of an initial tenant rollout and have some of the functionality, but as mentioned, I think over the course of the next couple of weeks, it'll probably end up being a full-blown rollout where everybody has the ability of doing the convert to a hub as well as the associate to the hub.
Okay, thank you, Justin. As there are no more questions, this does conclude today's webinar. A recording of this will be sent to all participants. You will each be receiving our survey as well. Please do take a few moments and provide your feedback on today's webinar. In the meantime, if you have any questions, please contact us at info@microexcel.com. Thank you and have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everybody. Happy Halloween.